myopia is so common.
You know who used to get myopia in the 16th century? Monks. Why? Because monks were the only ones reading in close-up. Johannes Kepler figured this out hundreds of years ago.
It's more common in Asian populations. It's called an epidemic in China.
It's more common in Asian populations, by the way, because there are multiple genetic markers that affect how much the eye elongates. I bet he's not going to mention this because I bet he doesn't know this, but myopia is not genetic. So short-sightedness is not genetic, but how much your eye will elongate in response to stimulus does have a genetic marker effect.
In California, we have a lot of Asian heritage or Asian Americans. And so we see a lot, like at Stanford, we see a lot of, myopia in kids and adults.
Does he know why? Is he going to say it? What do you think?
And really starting to get thoughtful on the science of myopia control. How do we provide the right environments? Now, what's interesting is that for decades, the assumption, some of the data really led us to the path of thinking like, gosh, the more you spend at near activities, and these are mouse model experiments like you described, but
it's not animal data. Do me a favor, go to scholar.google.com and type in pseudomyopia and type in near-induced transient myopia. There's an incredible amount of data. There's tens of thousands of peer-reviewed clinical studies that show what causes myopia. Let the guy continue.
Also, well-designed human cohort studies, figuring out like asking, kids and families, like how long is your kid reading or in front of the computer? How myopic are they? How nearsighted are they? Versus how much time is your kid in front of the computer doing?
We have a lot more professionally designed studies and asking parents how much time kids spend in front of their computer. Does this guy not know how study design works?
Near work, how myopic or nearsighted are they? And these well-designed cohort studies did point towards this concept that if you do too much near work as a kid, that you're more likely to develop nearsightedness as you get through those sort of, preteen and even into the teen years.
Oh my God. Okay, this is incredibly painful. Okay, so if you're not familiar, and since this doctor in ophthalmology doesn't seem to know, what causes myopia? Near-induced transient myopia. If you looked it up in Google Scholar, that is one of the most common terms used in peer-reviewed clinical science in tens of thousands of reference studies. You have a focusing muscle in the eye. And if you know me, I've explained this a million times. It's called the ciliary muscle in the front of the eye that shapes the lens in your eye for close-up and relaxes for distance vision. So your eye the lens flattens for distance visions. It curves for close-up, right? So the ciliary muscle tenses up when you're in close-up mode. The biology is designed to be primarily in distance vision mode and occasionally in close-up mode. So that muscle is challenged when you're in close-up mode. What happens with sustained long-term close-up use is the muscle spasms. Near-induced, caused by near vision, transient, meaning temporary, myopia, completely clearly understood. We don't have to ask parents how much time the kids spent reading. This has been extremely well explored. And the reason glasses are $100 billion industry is because guys like this, doctors of ophthalmology, don't even know the science, which is just unbelievable. The other term is pseudomyopia, P-S-E-U-D-O, myopia. The other explanation, same concept, that it's not real myopia, it's just a focusing muscle spasm initially before you go to guys like this who sell you glasses because they don't understand the cause and they're apparently not reading the science.
Which is when most of that myopia progression or eyeball elongation is actually happening to
whoa. Does he make it age-related? That'll be funny. Let's see.
Cause nearsightedness. It's only been in the last few years that some really exciting studies have actually pointed in a slightly different direction. And that's that maybe it's not all, not to say it's not about near activity, but maybe it's not all about near activity. Maybe it's actually a little more about the kind of light we're getting into our eyes.
Okay, so The eyeball has a mechanism built into it to control its length, right? Like there's two pieces. One is the muscle in the front of the eye that spasms get stuck in close-up mode. So the reason initially you have blurry distance vision when that first happens is just because focus is stuck in close-up. It's like if you take a camera with a lens and you set it to manual focus and you set the focus to something near and then you look through the camera at something far, it's blurry. That's pseudomyopia. Axial change, when the eyeball actually elongates, the eye has a system to control its length and to maintain the correct length that happens from the day you're born till the day you die. When you're born, you're hyperopic, so your eyeball is too short, and it elongates based on environmental stimulus to be correct, that you have clear vision near and far. This mechanism continues to work till you die because your eye is a fluid-filled ball. It's never perfect. The biology to account for variability in the length of your eye and having to readjust is always present. There's tons of cool studies, maybe I'll try to remember to link some below, that show the impact of the axial length of your eye that can be measured in as little as 60 minutes, 1 hour, how your eye changes in length, not just gets longer, but also gets shorter. It's 0% age related, 0%.
And I think you've talked about this before, and it's really important. When they've now studied and asked the kids, instead of just how much near and how much far are you doing, how much time are you spending indoors in indoor lighting, which doesn't have full spectrum light in a typical indoor environment, versus how much time are you spending outdoors?
This lighting argument is ridiculous. This lighting argument is only made by people who have never read any of the science that I just mentioned and that you can look up easily. Primary causation of myopia is really simple. The muscle's stuck. There's no obscure, maybe it's the light. No, we know what it is. We don't have to guess. Ciliary muscle stuck in close-up mode, pseudomyopia. When you wear glasses for a while, your eyeball starts elongating. Can't even without lens wear, right? Like the axial change myopia is caused by the stimulus of how close are you looking at something and lens wear, but that's another bigger topic. There is no mystery. There is no exciting recent studies. Oh, maybe it's the light. We know what causes myopia. We know conclusively what causes myopia. We don't have to guess.
Playing in the yard. You could be reading outside, but what kind of time are you spending outside? And of course, when you're outside in sunlight, even if it's in direct sunlight, you're getting a different spectrum of kind of full spectrum lighting from the.
Okay, let's see what studies he specifically references and what effect light spectrum has on your axial length of your eyeball, right? How does light spectrum affect the length of your eyeball? Because myopia is just stuck muscle and eyeball length. What does a light spectrum do? Is he going to explain? I bet you not.
Sun. And it looks like it's pretty clear now, actually, that it has maybe more to do with outdoor lighting time than.
I want to debate this guy. I want him to quote, I know this is a reaction video, but I'm genuinely getting annoyed because his level of ignorance is freaking amazing. Put me and this guy on a podcast and let me quote some actual peer-reviewed science and let me see. I'm curious what the light spectrum does to the axial length or the muscle in your eye.
And just near work. And so I think that, we've actually already seen the first couple randomized controlled trials where they're having kids intentionally spending time outdoors versus sort of.
When they're spending time outdoors, they're not on a screen. It's not a mystery of what's going on. When you're outdoors, you're looking at distances. You're not looking up close. That's all it is. I'd love for him to quote any of these study authors or studies so we can look them up.
Standard life, which, is going to be often much more indoor time. And seeing some effects. You follow those kids over a couple of years, and the kids who spend time outdoors are progressing in their nearsightedness less.
That is fucking painful, honestly. Like, that's a study following kids around. What else do you think kids do that spend more time outdoors? Play less video games, maybe? Like causation versus correlation. This guy.
Their nearsighted prescription is not getting as strong as the kids who are spending more time indoors. And there's some pretty good biology that's getting worked out, going back to animal models, more about how that might be working in the retina.
We know how it's working in the retina. It's kind of a longer topic, how red and green light affect, or the wavelength is slightly different. They hit the retina at slightly different rates. That's how the retina knows if the image is properly focused on the retina. If any part of the image is on behind the retina, In particular, peripheral defocus affects that. The eyeball grows longer. If the light hits in front of the retina, the eyeball grows shorter. Human studies going back freaking decades. This has been well explored. This guy does not know what the science says.
Inside the eye, but it's pretty compelling concept. And so, as a parent, you may want to be telling your kid, like, okay, yeah, I want you to read that book, or, if your kid's playing on the phone or something like that, or the iPad or something like that, they're allowed that time. Okay, you can have that time, but I want you to spend some of the time that you're doing that outdoors.
Are there any?
Kill me! You spending time on the iPad outdoors versus indoors has absolutely zero effect on anything. Again, pseudomyopia and ciliary spasm and eyeball axial length. The magical light, if you're playing on the iPad, it doesn't matter where you play on the iPad. The only thing that matters is the distance from your eye and how long you do it. This guy genuinely doesn't know what he's talking about. Unbelievable.
Thresholds for the amount of time that one would suggest their child be outdoors to get that full spectrum light?
It's a great question. We talk about cohort studies where we just ask people, what are they doing?
Cohort studies suck. If you ask people what you're doing, that's not study design. I mean, the guy is obviously not a scientist, so we can't fault him that he doesn't know how good study design works, but he hasn't even read any, apparently, by what he's saying.
And there seems to be, a little bit of what we would call a dose-dependent response. Maybe the more time outdoors might be better. We don't know if there's an upper limit, like, gosh, if you go over 2 or 3 hours, there's no additional benefit. We talk about that in cohort studies. The real gold standard for answering these kinds of questions are randomized controlled trials, and specifically placebo-controlled, or a control group that's not getting the intervention. That's our highest level of
Going outdoors is an intervention now. Oh, that's funny.
Evidence, for clinical evidence, for any of this kind of science, when we're talking about humans or preclinical models in the laboratory. And the study that hasn't been done yet to really answer that question is to randomize kids to telling this group of kids.
God, it's unbelievable. It's like the guy's walking around in the dark room, just tapping at the wall, going, maybe, where is it? We already know. We don't need a randomized study to figure out how much outdoor time you need. You need less time when close-ups.
You just do your normal life. Tell this group of kids, we want you outside an hour. This group of kids, we want you outside 2 hours a day. Big difference. Like, we have pretty good evidence now from the studies that have been done that the difference between 0 and 1 or 2 hours.
Okay, I can't handle any more of this hour stuff. I will skip
answers to those questions dependence to that.
And I can imagine it's a little bit hard to tease apart the near-far viewing from the indoor-outdoor, because yes, of course, a child could be...
Tease apart the indoor and outdoor from near and far viewing is very simple. You just do both and see what difference it makes. You don't have to tease it apart. How is this guy a freaking scientist? I mean, nothing against Andrew Huberman. I don't watch a lot of his content because it just seems like he covers every topic under the sun, influencer style. But if he knows how studies work, teasing apart indoor versus outdoor versus near and far is a very simple study to do.
Outside on an iPad up close. But it's hard to imagine that at some point they aren't seeing off into the distance, far viewing, as it's called. And the reverse is also true. If you're indoors, unless you live in a very, very large home or you're staring off a balcony.
Okay, that's true. You're going to look less far. Yay, common sense. Great job.
Far viewing is much harder to achieve.
Yeah.
So it's, and perhaps it isn't important to isolate these variables, although I can see the challenge in developing a really good clinical trial, randomized clinical trial for this. Meanwhile,
Meanwhile, there's a bazillion studies that show what causes myopia, how fast myopia progresses. Literally, there are multiple contact lens brands that are advertised to slow down myopia progression because of built-in defocus rings. So myopic defocus makes the light focus in front of the eye, and they just put some rings of that in there where you have your primary focal plane that you see at a distance, and there's some defocus rings to make the light some of the light focus in front of the retina to keep the eyeball from elongating. Like, not only is the science clearly understood, actively there are plenty of products in the marketplace to prevent myopia progression based on the understood science. That this guy doesn't know about the science in the first place is shocking. especially since there are products that exist, that there's not just the science of what causes all this and the myopia progression, there's science looking at the products that you can buy to slow myopia progression. Like, this guy lives on the rock.
I'll go into the grave shouting, or saying rather, and suggesting that people get some morning sunlight in their eyes to set their circadian rhythm. But far viewing at least a few minutes and ideally hours per day.
Whoa. Far viewing a few minutes per day? He's suggesting, that's very generous. A few minutes per day, look at a distance. From what you understand from my ranting, right? Like, if you spend only a few minutes a day looking far, that muscle's going to be stuck and you're going to have myopia and progressive myopia 100% for sure.
Or a mixture of near and far viewing by being outdoors just seems like a good thing to do regardless of age. So are there any data in older people, not necessarily elderly, but older people? So people when they're from, say, 25 years of age into their 60s or 70s, that getting outdoors and getting this full spectrum light is healthy for the eye in ways that are separate from the known healthy effects of doing that on circadian rhythm setting.
Yeah. The circadian part's pretty clear. In most people, the development of nearsightedness happens a lot until age 10, little more through age 20, little more than that in through the 20s up to 30.
Okay, this guy has absolutely no. Both of these guys do not know anything about myopia. Is unbelievable. Right? We covered it. I'm not going to rant again about, we know what causes myopia, but it's not age related. I will explain to you, causation and correlation is a concept that this guy doesn't know anything about. Age and myopia development is correlated, but it's not caused by age. It's correlated in that your eye is developing and you're developing habits, right? So since you're not born when you're 30, you're born when you're 0, and you start reading and looking at close-up stuff a lot initially in the younger years, which precede your older years, that's why myopia develops at that time, because the ciliary muscle spasm happens then, right? And the axial elongation from you wearing glasses happens then. It's not because of your age, it's because that's where you're starting life, and that's where the eye's adjusting to the environmental stimulus. It's correlated with your age. Yep, you see it progressing in the age, but it's not because of the age. And you wouldn't think that if you knew anything about the science.
Tiny bit in the 30s up to 40, but usually by those later ages, your prescription might be changing a quarter of a diopter. That's the measurement that we use when we, give you your glasses prescription. A quarter of a diopter, half a diopter. It could get a half diopter more nearsighted or less nearsighted.
Oh, we don't even know why.
Once you're aging into your 40s, 50s, and beyond. So most of the action on nearsightedness development is actually really happening in the younger ages.
If you're a farmer till you're 30 and then you go to university, that's when your myopia is going to start developing. That's how it works. I mean, it's super clear and simple.
So again, the premise of intervening in an older person, and I'll just include you and me in older people for the sake of this definition, as much as I'm reticent to do that in general. I think the premise of sort of light modulation for nearsightedness in older people is probably not so strong. I think.
Okay, the light modulation doesn't freaking matter. It doesn't matter, dude. This guy. Okay. My faith in the medical profession, since I've been doing this for 20 years, has diminished a huge amount. Like the level of ignorance here, light modulation, nothing to do with anything. Endmyopia, we have tens of thousands of people literally over the last 20 years, 10 years online, first-hand reports, thousands of first-hand reports, optometrists and ophthalmologists confirmed reports of significant myopia improvement, eyesight improvement, all the way to reversal. Tons of people had the DMV restriction removed from their license till their 90s. It doesn't matter how old you are, but we must give up on your eyes because you're not 15 and most myopia appears to develop in the early years. So therefore, there's no point in trying to fix it when you're older. There
are a lot of other benefits. You've talked a lot about circadian rhythm. there are so many health benefits to exercise. And, if you're getting outdoors, there's a good chance you're going to be walking or bicycling, so exercise value for the health of our eyes and the rest of our body is clearly there. But I don't know that there's really a strong premise that you're going to change your glasses prescription, in our 40s or 50s or.
I have a great study posted super recently. I don't know if I'm going to remember to link all this, of axial length reduction, a peer-reviewed clinical study, a proper study, showing that your axial length of your eye reduces with the correct stimulus, myopic defocus. It's a really interesting studies. It's in a range of adults that are not 15 that show that the myopia reverses. So this guy, if you go to this guy, right, and you have myopia, he's going to tell you what he's saying here. He's like, there's no point. You're too old. There's nothing we can do. Nonsense. That is the problem with this establishment. They sell you these subscriptions. He calls it prescriptions, but that's another rant I'm not going to get into now. Well, they're clear curved pieces of plastic that wholesale cost $2 to $5. These people that sell these things, or the optometrists more likely, charge hundreds of dollars. The average markup on prescription lenses is 6,000%. These people operate in the framework of a business that manages conditions, that have you subscribed to what they call prescriptions for life. They're not interested in health. They're not interested in fixing things. This guy doesn't even understand the science. It's so easy to look up. Spend 10 minutes and you're going to find a huge amount of peer-reviewed clinical science. Their paradigm is treatment forever.
Meow, 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 meow.